Wolf Pups chose the gentle Omega overall. The savage Alpha King learned why loyal souls ran to Omega. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to Elena Moore. The morning air over Blackthorn territory carried the clean scent of pine and frost, the kind that settled into the lungs and reminded every wolf who truly ruled this land. And yet Elena stood apart from the stone paths and iron routines, quiet as the first light touching dew, her pale hands tucked into worn sleeves as she moved with careful steps near the outer den where no orders echoed and no trophies hung. She was an Omega, gentle by nature, pale-skinned like most of the pack, yet marked by softness rather than strength. And in a place measured by dominance, she learned early to stay small, to be useful without being seen, to offer warmth where others offered commands. While the Alpha King Rowan Blackthorn enforced order from the high terrace with a gaze that could still a crowd, Elena's days were filled with simple tasks, refilling water basins, mending blankets, checking the quiet corners where young wolves slept, places where voices lowered and tempers cooled. Some said her calm was weakness, others said it was wasted, and when her name passed between betas it did so lightly, as if she were part of the background, a soft color meant to fade. That morning, the temperature hovered just above freezing, maybe 32 degrees, and the pack stirred with unusual tension as word spread of orphaned wolf pups brought in from the northern edge, tiny bundles of silver and gray fur unsettled by noise and unfamiliar scents. Strong hands tried to guide them. Firm voices attempted discipline, but the pups only whimpered and pressed together, their instincts refusing the sharp edges of control. Elena watched from a distance, her heart tightening not with fear but recognition, and when a steward waved her closer with a dismissive shrug, she did not hurry. She simply knelt, lowering herself to the pup's level, palms open, breath slow, her presence steady like a hearth on a winter night. She said nothing, because she had learned that trust rarely arrives on command, and in the hush that followed, the pups' restless movements eased, their small bodies inching toward her warmth as if pulled by something older than rank. From the terrace, unseen by her, the Alpha King observed, his broad frame still, his eyes narrowing not in anger but curiosity, as the smallest pup toddled free of the group and pressed its nose against Elena's sleeve, choosing her without hesitation. The moment was quiet, almost invisible, yet it carried weight, the kind that shifts the ground beneath old beliefs. And as Elena gently drew the pups closer, unaware of the gaze upon her, the territory itself seemed to listen, waiting for what this simple act would teach its fiercest ruler. The hours that followed passed in a hush that Elena Moore did not question, because quiet had always been her world, and yet this quiet felt different, heavier, as if the land itself were holding its breath. The wolf pups remained near her long after the others drifted away, curling against her legs and sleeves, their small bodies warm despite the cold ground, and Elena stayed exactly where she was, unmoving, afraid that any sudden motion might break the fragile trust settling between them. She felt their breathing slow, felt the tension ease from their tiny frames, and something in her chest loosened in response. A familiar ache she had carried since childhood, the ache of wanting to protect without being asked. Around them, murmurs spread through the pack, low and uncertain, because this was not how things usually worked, not how strength was measured here. Betas exchanged glances, their pale faces drawn with confusion, unsure whether to step in or step back, unsure how to explain what they were witnessing. Elena heard none of it clearly, only fragments carried by the wind, words like strange and unexpected, spoken without cruelty but without understanding either. She kept her eyes lowered, focused on the smallest pup whose head rested against her wrist, its heartbeat quick but steady, and she wondered if this was what peace felt like when it arrived quietly instead of being earned through struggle. Somewhere behind her, boots pressed against stone, deliberate and controlled, and the air shifted in a way that made even the older wolves straighten instinctively. Alpha King Rowan Blackthorn moved closer, not with the sharp authority he usually carried, but with measured steps, his presence heavy yet restrained, and for the first time in years, he did not speak immediately. His gaze rested on the scene before him. The gentle Omega seated on the cold earth, pale skin flushed by the chill, surrounded by pups who had refused every command but hers. He had ruled by certainty, by rules that left little room for softness. And yet here was something that did not bend under pressure, something that had chosen freely. Elena sensed him before she saw him, a weight at the edge of her awareness, and slowly she lifted her eyes, meeting his from beneath lowered lashes, not in challenge, not in fear, but with quiet acknowledgement. She did not rise. She did not pull the pups closer or push them away. She simply stayed. A breath passed between them, long enough for the pack to notice the pause, long enough for expectation to sharpen, and when Rowan finally spoke, his voice was low, controlled, stripped of its usual edge. He asked what she had done, and Elena answered honestly, her tone soft, steady, carrying no plea for approval. She said she had listened. She said she had waited. The words were simple, almost unremarkable, yet something shifted behind the Alpha King's eyes, a subtle change that only those closest to power ever notice. He looked at the pups again, watched how they pressed closer to her warmth without being summoned, and for the first time, he considered the idea that loyalty might not be commanded, that trust might run toward gentleness instead of force. The cold morning light crept higher, catching on stone and fur alike, and as Elena carefully adjusted her position so the smallest pup would not slip onto the frozen ground, Rowan gave a quiet order that no one disturb her, not today. It was not a declaration, not a public display, but it rippled through the pack all the same, and Elena felt it without understanding why, a sense that something unseen had begun to turn, slowly, inevitably, toward her. By midday the frost had softened, and a pale winter sun traced slow arcs across the den yard, casting long shadows that shifted with the hours. Yet Elena Moore remained where she was, adjusting only when the pups stirred, her movements careful and unassuming. She had been offered a stool, then a blanket. Each suggestion waved away with a quiet smile, because she knew that comfort could wait when trust was still forming. The pups followed her rhythm, waking and settling, learning her scent, their small paws testing the ground before returning to her side, as if tethered by an invisible thread. Word traveled through the territory in low voices, not with excitement, but with curiosity, because this was not a spectacle, it was a question unfolding in real time. When the Alpha King passed again, he did not stand apart on stone, he stopped at a respectful distance, arms crossed, observing without interruption, and the betas took their cues from his restraint, allowing the moment to breathe. Elena noticed the change in the way people looked at her, not warmer, not kinder, but less dismissive, as if something they could not name had asked for their attention. A young attendant approached with water, and one pup followed the movement, then stopped, turned back, and pressed into Elena's side, choosing stillness over distraction. She felt the choice like a gentle weight, neither pride nor triumph, simply responsibility. As afternoon cooled toward evening, the Alpha King spoke again, not to command but to inquire, asking where she had learned such patience. Elena answered with the truth she always carried, that she had learned it by being overlooked, by listening more than she spoke, by noticing what others rushed past. The words were plain, yet they lingered, and Rowan Blackthorn found himself considering the cost of speed, the blind spots of authority, the way power often drowned out the quiet signals that kept a pack whole. He ordered a sheltered corner prepared nearby, not a pen, not a display, but a warm place shielded from wind, and when the pups were guided toward it, they moved only after Elena rose and stepped first, checking the ground, checking the air, ensuring the change did not feel like a loss. As dusk settled, the temperature dipped into the low 20s, and lanterns flickered to life, their glow reflecting off pale fur and pale skin alike. Elena wrapped the smallest pup in her sleeves, sharing warmth, and for the first time she noticed the Alpha King kneel, not close, not imposing, but low enough to be at eye level with the pups. He did not reach out. He waited. One pup tilted its head, then shuffled forward, stopping short, considering him, then turned back to Elena, brushing her knee before settling between them. Rowan exhaled slowly, a sound of understanding rather than frustration. And in that space, he learned something no decree had taught him, that loyalty does not always run toward the strongest presence, but toward the one who makes room. When night fully arrived and stars pricked the sky, he dismissed the crowd with a simple gesture, leaving only the quiet and the soft sounds of breathing. Elena did not realize she had been placed under protection until she felt it in the stillness, in the absence of interruption, in the way the territory seemed to hold her gently. She remained unaware of how far the ripple had spread, how a single afternoon had begun to redraw lines she had never been allowed to cross. And as the pups slept, trusting and unafraid, the Alpha King stood watch from the shadows, learning the shape of a strength that did not need to announce itself. Morning returned quietly, not with ceremony, but with the soft gray light that slipped between stone walls and warmed the edges of frost left behind from the night. And Elena more woke before the first bell because the pups stirred before sound carried. She shifted carefully, easing numbness from her legs, and the smallest pup pressed closer as if sensing the movement, trusting that she would not leave. Around them the sheltered corner felt different now, less forgotten, more deliberate, and Elena noticed signs of quiet preparation. Fresh straw laid evenly, water replaced, warmth maintained without intrusion. She did not ask who had ordered it, but she knew. The Alpha King's presence lingered even when he was not visible, not heavy, not threatening, but attentive in a way that made the air feel steadier. As the pups woke fully, stretching and blinking against the light, Elena guided them outside where the sun hovered low and pale, the temperature climbing slowly toward 40 degrees. The territory resumed its rhythm, footsteps measured, voices controlled, yet people slowed when they passed, watching without staring, their curiosity tempered by the new boundary that had formed around her. Rowan Blackthorn arrived without escort, dressed plainly, his posture relaxed, but alert, and he observed how the pups followed Elena's lead, how they paused when she paused, how they ventured only as far as her calm allowed. He asked if she needed help, not as an order but as an offer, and Elena shook her head gently, explaining that the pups needed consistency more than assistance, that too many hands would confuse them. The Alpha King accepted this without challenge, a decision that did not go unnoticed, and he took a step back, giving her space that felt earned rather than granted. As the morning unfolded, a test emerged without intention, when a sudden noise from the far gate echoed across the yard, drawing attention and tension in equal measure. The pups startled, scattering instinctively, but instead of running outward or hiding blindly, they ran toward Elena, clustering close, their trust immediate and complete. She lowered herself again, arms forming a quiet circle, her breathing slow and even, and the pups mirrored her calm until the moment passed. Rowan watched closely, recognizing the pattern not as training but as choice, and something settled into place behind his eyes. He realized that authority could demand attention, but it could not inspire this kind of return, this instinctive alignment that required no force. Later, as the sun climbed higher and the temperature edged into the low 50s, he spoke with her again, asking what she would do when the pups grew stronger, when they no longer needed constant closeness. Elena answered that she would step back when they were ready, that care did not mean possession, that loyalty flourished best when given room. The simplicity of her words carried weight, and Rowan found himself measuring his reign against them, wondering how often strength had crowded out growth. By afternoon, the pups explored farther, still returning, still checking, and Elena allowed herself to stand more often, guiding with presence rather than touch. The pack adjusted without instruction, voices lowering nearby, movements careful, as if something fragile but valuable had been placed among them. Rowan issued a quiet directive that Elena's duties be limited to the pups for now, not as elevation, not as reward, but as recognition of where she was needed most. She accepted without comment, unaware that this choice marked a shift in how she would be seen, not as background, not as convenience, but as someone whose gentleness carried consequence. As the day waned and shadows lengthened, the Alpha King remained at a distance, watchful, learning the language of stillness, and Elena felt the territory respond in ways she could not name, a subtle alignment, a shared breath, as loyal souls continued to find their way to the one who never asked them to kneel. The fifth day unfolded with a subtle shift that Elena more felt before she understood, a tightening beneath the calm, as if the territory were testing a new balance. The pups had grown bolder, venturing farther across the yard, their small bodies discovering the rhythm of the place, and Elena adjusted with them, offering guidance without restraint, letting them choose their paths while remaining present. The temperature hovered in the low 60s by midday, warm enough for the stone to release its chill, and the air carried familiar scents that grounded her. Yet curiosity now followed her openly, not unkind but persistent, and she sensed questions forming where dismissal once lived. When a pair of older betas approached with careful smiles and suggestions, offering structured routines and scheduled handling, Elena listened respectfully and declined with equal care, explaining that the pups were learning best through consistency and choice. The refusal was gentle, but it carried weight, and for the first time she noticed hesitation in those accustomed to being obeyed. Word reached the Alpha King quickly, not as complaint but as concern, and Rowan Blackthorn arrived sooner than expected, his presence steadying the space as he assessed the tension with practiced eyes. He listened to both sides without interruption, then turned to Elena, asking how she wished to proceed, and the simplicity of the question quieted the yard more effectively than any command. Elena answered that the pups needed trust more than technique, that their loyalty would grow from safety rather than structure, and she accepted responsibility for the outcome without defensiveness. Rowan considered this, measuring the calm before him against the certainty he had once demanded, and he made a choice that surprised those watching. He affirmed her approach publicly, not elevating her voice above others, but placing his authority behind her steadiness, and the betas stepped back, recalibrating. The decision sent a ripple through the pack, not of rebellion but of reassessment, as wolves accustomed to hierarchy witnessed authority align with gentleness rather than override it. Later, as afternoon shadows lengthened and the pups rested in scattered clusters, Rowan remained nearby, observing the way Elena moved among them, correcting nothing, encouraging little, allowing growth to unfold. He spoke quietly of his own upbringing, of lessons learned through pressure and expectation, and Elena listened without judgment, offering no solution beyond presence. The exchange changed something intangible between them, a mutual recognition that strength and care were not opposites, but partners awaiting balance. As evening approached and the temperature dipped toward 50 degrees, a brief disturbance echoed from beyond the walls, drawing attention without threat, and the pups responded as they had before, returning to Elena's side with immediate trust. She lowered herself, offering reassurance through stillness, and Rowan watched the pattern repeat, understanding now that loyalty was not seized but chosen again and again. He issued a simple directive that no one interfere with Elena's stewardship, not as privilege but as acknowledgement of what had already proven true, and the pack accepted it with quiet resolve. When lanterns flickered on and stars emerged, Elena felt the weight of attention ease, replaced by something steadier, and she realized that the challenge before her was not resistance, but responsibility, the careful guarding of a trust freely given. Rowan stood apart, gaze thoughtful, learning how restraint could command deeper allegiance than force, and as loyal souls continued to gather around the gentle Omega, the territory itself seemed to lean closer, listening to the lesson being taught, without a single raised voice. By the sixth morning the territory felt subtly transformed, not louder or softer, but more attentive, as if every path and stone had learned to pause before reacting. Elena more noticed it in small ways, in how supplies appeared where they were needed without comment, in how footsteps slowed near the sheltered corner, in how voices lowered when the pups slept. The pups themselves had grown stronger, their movements surer, their curiosity balanced by an instinctive return to safety, and Elena guided them with quiet consistency, never pulling, never pushing, letting their confidence build at its own pace. The weather warmed into the mid-60s, sunlight lingering longer across the yard, and with it came visitors from neighboring sections of the territory, wolves who had heard of the calm and wanted to see it for themselves. They kept their distance, respectful, observing the pattern that had formed around Elena like a natural boundary. Rowan Blackthorn joined. Her mid-morning, not as a ruler inspecting progress, but as a presence seeking understanding, and he asked how she measured success without rules or ranks. Elena considered the question carefully before answering that she measured it by return, by who chose to come back when they were free to leave, by who rested without fear. The simplicity of her answer stayed with him as the day unfolded, challenging the metrics he had relied upon for years. A small test emerged when one pup wandered farther than before, drawn by movement near the outer gate, and the yard grew still as eyes tracked the moment. Elena did not call out. She did not rush. She knelt and waited, her posture open, her breathing steady, and after a pause that felt longer than it was, the pup turned and trotted back, choosing her calm over the unknown. Rowan felt the choice land like a lesson, quiet but undeniable, and he recognized the trust she had cultivated as something that could not be commanded into existence. In the afternoon, he convened a brief gathering, not to announce changes, but to acknowledge what had been observed, speaking of balance, of listening, of the strength found in patience. He did not name Elena as an example, but eyes drifted to her all the same, understanding passing without words. As the sun dipped and shadows stretched, Rowan approached her once more, asking what she needed to continue. Elena surprised herself by answering honestly that she needed nothing beyond time and respect, that resources mattered less than restraint. He agreed, issuing guidance that ensured her space remained uninterrupted, not elevating her role, but protecting its integrity. The evening settled into a calm that felt earned, lanterns glowing softly, pups sleeping in loose clusters, their trust evident in the way they sprawled without tension. Elena watched them breathe, feeling the weight of responsibility settled gently rather than heavily, and she realized that the challenge ahead was not proving gentleness, but sustaining it under attention. Rowan stood at the edge of the light, his expression thoughtful, learning how leadership could amplify what was already working rather than replace it. And as the territory exhaled into night, loyal souls continued to choose the quiet center she provided, teaching a king that the deepest allegiance grows where it is given room to return. The seventh day brought a kind of clarity that Elena more felt settle into her bones like warmth after a long winter, not sudden, not dramatic, but unmistakable. The pups greeted the morning with eager steps, their confidence now an easy thing, and Elena rose with them, stretching stiff muscles, her breath fogging briefly in air that hovered near 60 degrees before the sun climbed. The territory moved around her with practiced ease, and for the first time she sensed alignment rather than adjustment, as if everyone had learned where to stand without being told. Rowan Blackthorne arrived earlier than usual, carrying no agenda, his presence unannounced, and he watched as the pups dispersed and returned, testing independence without losing connection. He noticed how Elena offered direction with her body rather than her voice, stepping into paths, opening space, letting curiosity resolve itself. When he asked if she felt ready for the next step, Elena paused, then answered that readiness belonged to the pups, not to her, that her role was to notice when they no longer needed her center. The honesty of it struck him, because it placed trust above control, and he found himself considering how often leadership mistook speed for progress. A quiet moment followed when one pup approached him directly, not cautiously, not deferentially, simply curious, then turned back to Elena as if to check, receiving only a calm nod before returning to its exploration. The exchange was small, but it reshaped something fundamental, and Rowan felt a rare humility settle in, the understanding that influence could be shared without being diminished. As the day warmed into the low 70s, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of pine and stone, he gathered a few key members of the pack, not for ceremony, but for acknowledgement, speaking of stewardship, of listening, of the responsibility that comes with being chosen rather than obeyed. He did not elevate Elena with titles or declarations, but he placed his trust visibly beside hers, and the pack accepted the shift without resistance, because it reflected what they had already seen. Elena listened quietly, her attention never straying far from the pups, and she realized that recognition did not feel like triumph, but like obligation fulfilled. In the afternoon, Rowan walked with her along the edge of the yard, asking how she maintained steadiness under attention, and she answered that attention faded when purpose remained clear, that kindness required boundaries as much as openness. The answer stayed with him, threading through old habits, offering a different measure of authority. As evening approached, the pups settled naturally, choosing spots near Elena without clustering, comfortable in their autonomy, and she allowed herself a rare moment of stillness, hands resting loosely, shoulders relaxed. Rowan paused at a respectful distance, his gaze softening as he watched the pattern hold without effort, and he understood that what he had learned could not be commanded into others, only modeled and protected. He issued a final, quiet assurance that Elena's work would continue without interference, not as reward, but as recognition of what had already proven true, and she inclined her head, accepting not the favor, but the trust. When lanterns lit and the first stars emerged, the territory felt complete in a way it had not before, loyal souls choosing their place freely, and Elena sensed that the balance she guarded was no longer fragile. Rowan stood at the edge of the light, no longer merely observing, but changed, carrying forward a lesson taught without force, as gentleness continued to shape the strongest bonds in the land. The 8th day unfolded with a sense of inevitability, as if the territory itself had reached a conclusion before words could catch up. Elena more felt it in the way the morning settled, calm and assured, the air warming quickly into the low 70s, sunlight steady rather than tentative. The pups greeted her with familiar ease, their greetings brief now, confident, as they dispersed to explore without hesitation, returning only to check before moving on again. She watched them with a quiet pride that did not cling, understanding that success meant letting go at the right moments. Rowan Blackthorne arrived as the yard filled with light, his posture relaxed, his presence no longer the center but a steady anchor at the edge, and he took in the scene with eyes that saw beyond outcome to cause. He asked Elena to walk with him, not as summons but as invitation, and together they moved along the stone path where authority once loomed heavy. He spoke of what the pack had learned, of how behavior had shifted without force, of how disputes softened when patience replaced urgency, and Elena listened, offering reflections rather than direction, reminding him that change held when it was chosen repeatedly. As they spoke, a small group gathered, at a respectful distance, not intruding, but aware that something important was taking shape. Rowan stopped and addressed them calmly, affirming that Elena's stewardship would be recognized as essential to the territory's balance, not as exception but as example, and he made it clear that her space would remain protected from interference. There was no fanfare, no raised voices, only a collective understanding settling into place, and Elena felt the weight of attention transform into support. A pup wandered between them, pausing, then sitting near Elena's feet, and the simple act punctuated the moment more clearly than any declaration could have. Rowan acknowledged it with a small nod, his expression open, and for the first time he spoke of trust as something the territory would cultivate deliberately, not assume. The pack accepted the guidance without resistance, because it aligned with what they had witnessed over days of quiet consistency. As afternoon deepened and temperatures edged toward the mid-70s, Elena returned to her routine, not elevated, not isolated, simply continuing what worked, and Rowan stepped back, allowing the pattern to sustain itself. Later, when the lights softened and shadows lengthened, he approached her once more, this time to thank her, not for results, but for restraint, for teaching without instruction, for holding space without claiming it. Elena met his gratitude with calm acceptance, understanding that recognition did not change her purpose, only clarified it. As evening approached and lanterns were prepared, the pups settled naturally, their independence evident, their trust intact, and Elena felt a deep steadiness settle within her, the sense that what she had guarded was no longer fragile. Rowan watched from a distance, his presence unobtrusive, carrying forward a lesson that would shape his rule in quiet ways. And as the first stars appeared, the territory seemed to breathe together, loyal souls aligned not by command, but by choice, their paths drawn gently toward the center she provided. The final morning arrived without urgency, carrying the quiet certainty of something completed rather than ending, and Elena more greeted it with a calm that felt earned. The air warmed quickly toward the low 70s, sunlight steady and generous, and the pups stirred with an ease that told her they no longer needed her center in the way they once had. They moved confidently now, exploring wider paths, returning briefly to check in before continuing on, their trust intact. Even as their dependence faded, Elena watched with a soft smile, understanding that care had done its work by making itself unnecessary. Rowan Blackthorn arrived early, not to observe but to stand with her, his presence comfortable, unforced, and together they watched the territory wake into its rhythm. He spoke quietly of the changes that had taken root, of how disputes had softened, of how patience had become a shared language, and Elena listened, recognizing the pattern not as transformation, but as alignment. A moment came when the pups gathered loosely nearby, settling in the sun, their bodies relaxed, their breathing slow, and one chose to rest close to Elena while the others scattered, a simple image that held the truth of the past days. Rowan regarded it with a thoughtful expression, then looked to Elena and acknowledged what he had learned without grand words, admitting that loyalty answered to safety more readily than to strength, that authority endured when it protected what was gentle. The admission carried no loss, only clarity, and Elena accepted it with the same steadiness she had offered from the beginning. As midday approached, Rowan gathered the pack briefly, not for ceremony but for reflection, affirming that the balance they now felt was something to be guarded deliberately, that gentleness would be given room, not as exception, but as essential. He did not elevate Elena with titles or declarations, but his trust stood visibly beside hers, and the pack responded with quiet agreement. Elena returned to her routine, lighter now, aware that her role had shifted from holding to witnessing, from anchoring to allowing. In the afternoon, as temperatures edged into the mid-70s and the light softened, Rowan approached her one last time, thanking her for teaching without instruction, for showing that leadership could listen, for reminding a territory how to breathe together. Elena met his gratitude with a gentle nod, understanding that acknowledgement was not an ending, but a beginning carried forward by choice. As evening settled and lanterns glowed softly, the pups rested in their chosen places, independent yet connected, and Elena felt a deep peace settle within her, the sense that what she had guarded was now shared. Rowan stood nearby, no longer learning from a distance, but living the lesson, his rule reshaped quietly by what he had witnessed. When stars emerged and the territory exhaled into night, the truth of it all became clear without needing to be spoken, that the strongest bonds had formed not through command, but through kindness, and that loyal souls, given freedom and care, would always find their way home.